Right. Thank you, everyone, for coming to today's seminar. I am delighted to announce today's guest lecturer, who is Mr. Lutz Guellner. He is speaking today in his capacity of Senior Fellow of Strategic Communications and Education Research Unit, Graduate School of Public Policy, University of Tokyo. Mr. Lutz Guellner is head of the European Economic and Trade Office in Taiwan, the representation of European Union in Taipei. He is a senior career diplomat in the European External Action Service, which is the diplomatic service of the European Union, with a distinguished career in various positions related to political, economic, and security affairs. He was appointed to his current position on 1 September 2024. Prior to the current position, he was head of Division for Strategic Communications and Information Analysis, dealing with hybrid threats and non-traditional security issues such as foreign information manipulation, interference, FIMI. In fact, Lutz was almost a grandfather of FIMI approach of European Union, and we are especially proud to have his presence today. And also, I very much thank you for being such a wonderful friend to our unit, Cyril. So, floor is yours, Lutz.
So good afternoon, everybody. Dear Chiyuki, thank you very much for these kind words, and thank you for coming on this very rainy afternoon to this. Well, it's partly a lecture, partly a presentation, and partly a discussion. That's how I would like to at least handle it. I will today show you not only the idea of what is this information manipulation, why are we looking into this, what are the tools, but also place it a little bit in our own policy making as European Union as well. And I'm particularly happy because actually I was already a couple of times in this very room to discuss with many colleagues and from here, from Japan, but also from the region, exactly about why is it an issue that both governments as well as civil society organizations should look at. On the 27th of September, 2022 was a very important day for this work. It was a special day because on that day, simultaneously, the big social media network, Meta, Facebook, you know them, and a quite well-known and important civil society organization in Brussels, the EU Disinfo Lab, announced actually the discovery and the takedown of a large network of what do we call of cloned websites. So manipulated websites that used names of media with a good reputation, like The Guardian, The Spiegel in Germany, Le Monde, etc. And actually a long investigation, which lasted a couple of weeks and months, found out that many of these websites have been constructed, have been cloned. So people who went on the website of The Spiegel, for example, actually thought they were reading the news provided by this independent media, and it turned out that actually this was a manipulated kind of website. And that is quite something. It was not only one case, it was 70 or even more than 70 of those different websites coordinated. The whole operation could actually be attributed even to first specific actors that have done this, and then even to a state actor, in that case, Russia. And I think there has been a lot of evidence about this, how this was set up, etc. The point why I'm giving you this at the beginning of the lecture is just to make really the very, very important point. If we speak about information manipulation, we do not speak about how you craft your narrative, whether you have a good argument, whether a good communicator, whether you convince people, but we talk about a coordinated and very intentional activity that needs a lot of technical, a lot of know-how, so to say, to set it up, and needs real structures. And that's why this whole idea of information manipulation is not just about who has the better narrative, who has, it's the battle of the narratives, for example, but about a fraudulent activity in the information space. I wanted to put this at the very beginning. So what I want to do in this, let's say 30, 35 minutes, is to show you a bit kind of where do we come from, why is this kind of a specific new area, then speak about why is this part of security policy, is this not just a communication issue. Then I want to put it a bit in a context also about our own development, and if I say our, then I mean of course the European Union, the organization for which I'm working, how we change also and keep on changing in becoming a more and more active security actor, but not only in classic security, but also in new security issues. And then I will show you a couple of elements on this concept of FIMI. What is it? How can we detect it? What can you do about it? And then, of course, close with a bit of an outlook as well. So this is, you don't need to kind of copy these. These are just to give you a little bit of a theoretical grounding. This one is actually a very interesting graph that shows how a liberal society and a more authoritarian society are struggling with issues which kind of have a very, very close relation. If you look at, for example, free public opinion, for example, that can very, very quickly change to something that is in an illiberal or in a non-democratic way, can very, very quickly be used as a tool of the state. I will not dwell on this much more because this is not really the point of my lecture, but I just wanted to show you how close these things are interwoven. And more importantly, and that is really the point that I want to make also today, is, and this is a map, you can find many of them, I like this one very much, is where you look at what actually is the idea of a hybrid threat. I think in Asia you use more the term gray zone activity. The whole idea is that security cannot just be defined by military security. It needs to go beyond it. It needs to go into the stability of a society, for example. And all this is not totally new, but it shows these different areas that you need to look at. And the one element that I really, really would like to point to is, again, if we think about FIMI, it is, from our perspective and the way we treat it and the way we build also our different tools and our different approaches to it, it is part and parcel of a larger toolbox that you use in today's modern, call it statecraft, call it warfare, call it whatever you want, but it's important that this is not just a singular kind of activity. This is not, again, I will repeat this sentence very often, it's not about the better narrative, it is part and parcel of state activity in there. So if we continue just on this very, very little excursus on how to situate and what does it mean exactly, this is a graph also that I like very much because it brings all these different concepts together. I'm sure there are different ways of representing them, of hybrid warfare, cognitive warfare, information warfare, cyber warfare. What exactly is the difference? My point, and we discussed this with Chiyuki, by the way, is that there is still a lot of work necessary for scholars, for students. If you plan on writing your PhD on security and information, for example, I think this is one of the areas that really needs more work. How these things are interrelated. Hybrid, we can define very broadly as anything which is non-kinetic. But then we get into this very, very bizarre term of cognitive warfare. What is cognitive warfare is, of course, something that tries to influence the behavior, but also the perception of specific subjects, you know. And you can do this either by directly targeting specific individuals, or you come from more the way how, for example, information or news is consumed. And this is the famous information warfare, information manipulation. Information warfare has different meanings to some people. It's a very, very harsh term because it gives you the idea we're in a permanent war. And I come back to the term that we are using. I prefer the name manipulation, or we come back to this FIMI term in a moment, just to show you also what are key elements. But there's one additional element here that you need to keep in mind is this is all happening in a digital world, in a digital space, and hence the cyber activities, the cyber capabilities are really crucial to, first of all, deploy, but also to conduct this type of information. This is nothing that you do on a typewriter and distribute in any form or shape. Good. This was just kind of a very short kind of marker on why is this issue a broader security issue. How does it sit? Of course, we would need a week, to discuss the different issues here, and there are a lot of scholarly works that need to be done. The next point that I want to make is how does it fit in the EU's framework as well, before I go then into the issue itself. So bear with me a couple of minutes. Where does the, let's say, the developing capacity of the European Union play into this? And I just put out 5 different milestones here that are quite important in my view. There are plenty of others, and also this would be a week-filling seminar. If you look at the European Union as a security actor, for example, Lisbon Treaty is of course clear because that was the starting point for those of you who are quite familiar with the European Union. But something that seems to be already a little bit forgotten is that 5 years ago we adopted what we call the Security Union strategy, and for the first time in this document the whole area of cybersecurity and the linked areas around this became a very prominent place. There is a lot of follow-up activity from this Security Union strategy, in particular on the cyber elements that I just mentioned. And also here we wouldn't have time now to go into all these different elements, but it's important that we started actually by a very domestic issue. How can we help not only our companies but also our governments to be much more resilient against cyber attacks? That came then in 2023, a new security strategy of the European Union, which specifically put a big focus also on non-conventional issues, on issues that we label as hybrid threats, issues that are non-kinetic, that use these different tools that I will also speak about, and the issue of foreign information manipulation and interference, of FIMI, actually was born, let's say, in this document, or was validated in this document. And if you follow EU policy even further these days, there are 2 very important, there are plenty of important documents at the moment, but the one that I really suggest you might have a look at if you are interested is the white paper on defense readiness of the European Union. Is very much about conventional issues, is very much about cooperation between the EU governments, strengthening the industrial base also in this field. But you need to understand all these elements to see where we come from and why we have adopted such a concept that I will go into in a moment. So threats are not only seen as, let's say, kinetic ones. And this is, of course, in a very, very specific situation, that we have that is my boss, Ms. Callas, the High Representative and Vice President of the European Commission, where she states again that this is an issue which is not just for the EU, it's a real battleground. We need to understand it, we need to conceptualize it, we need to give us, first of all, awareness, we need to give ourselves the tools to deal with this, and that we, and in that case the European Union, but also our most like-minded countries and partners in this field, are actually well, she said, losing the war, but we still need to invest in this area. And that goes back, of course, to what we have done and where we go to. The starting point of the work on this specific, or in this specific field, is in 2015, when a new team was created. It was had the name of Stratcom East. Many of you have maybe heard about this. And it was there to expose and to analyze Russian disinformation campaigns, narratives, incidents. And they continue since 2015, so already for 10 or nearly 10 years now to do this in a website that if you have a moment to look into this, the EU versus Disinfo website, extremely interesting. It mapped over many years the different incidents, connected them, made very clear how it works, that this is not just about one narrative, but always about coordinated activities. And born from this experience that this team had in analyzing closer these incidents, these narratives, these activities, was actually the fact, okay, we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg. We need to go much deeper, and we need to understand much better how this is actually working. This is not just a newspaper writing an article or a person doing opinionating. Definitely not. It's about a state activity that is there. And that was a work that took quite some time to have also all the facts and figures. And the result of this we tried to put into one sentence, which is always very difficult with specific definitions. But we kind of pulled out a number of key elements. And in this key element, you see here some of the issues that are in bold. Coordinated is one of the key issues. So the coordination, that something is not just one person kind of out there, but that there's a group that is deliberately doing this. The manipulative actions. So there is a clear intention behind to deceive also. That have a threat also, that threaten or undermine values, procedures, political processes. Think, for example, about elections. You know, if you interfere in elections, this undermines a political process. Conducted by state or non-state actors. You know, it's not always this is Russia or this is country A or country B or something. This is a very complex system of proxies, of sometimes even commercial entities that are involved. So these are really key elements to understand this notion of FIMI. And we developed it also to make a clear line to distinguish it from the word disinformation, because disinformation has become a word, more a political charged term, where, let's say, the disinformation is very often seen the information from the others, you know, that you say, this is disinformation, it's not my view, etc. It has become a very politicized term as well. FIMI is a much more precise term. It says exactly what the problem is, that there is an outside actor trying to interfere in your own, let's say, internal, I don't want to say affairs, but in your public space in a way to manipulate it. So you have on the left side again, it needs to be intentional. There needs to be coordination. Of course, there needs to be also an element of harm, because if this is just kind of something that is happening somewhere without any consequences, this wouldn't be a problem. Manipulative, I just mentioned, for an actor. And one thing that wasn't in the definition, in this short element there, is that very often this is linked to cyber activities, to hacking. So many of you have heard about hack and leak operations. You know, also this sounds nearly sometimes a bit ancient. But if we think back about famous kind of exposure of specific, you remember the emails of Hillary Clinton, for example. These are hack and leak operations. So you need cyber capability, and then you use it in the information space. Good. Two things that I really want to point out on this specific slide here. The first one is the last element, which says content versus behavior. That sounds very academic. Content is what you see, what we actually call the disinformation, what we believe is really the problem, you know, these narratives that then sink in, that change perceptions, etc. But let's be very clear. As an open democracy, as liberal democracies, there is a very, very, very highly protected good, and that is called freedom of speech. And that's why it's extremely dangerous to have an approach that gives good narratives and bad narratives, that judges the content just as such. Content is very important because that's the end result. But where could you put the finger, you know, to say we want to address the issue? And where you can put the finger, and where we are putting the finger, is actually on the word behavior. So not so much about what do people say, but much more how do they produce it, how is it amplified, how is it distributed, what techniques are being used, what tactics are being used, what procedures are being used, which technical means are being employed, because that gives you a very, very good indicator of the intention also that is behind, and gives you also a good element to check these indicators that I mentioned here on the left side. The Peace Nobel Prize winner, Maria Ressa, once described this very, very nicely when she said, the content is like the bullet, like the projectile, you know, that is what produces the harm, that is what people see, this is what you can feel. But if you only focus on the bullets the whole time, then you will always be on the defensive. You need to look at also the weapon that has actually fired the bullet. You need to look at the system that is behind. And there are different ways of doing this that I will come back. One of the elements is, first of all, to understand how does the architecture look like? Who's doing what in this? Is it always the well-known state media? Is it an obscure social media channel? How does that work, actually? And in a recent report that I will quote quite often, because a lot of this material is based on this and is really distilled of my former colleagues, so the FIMI threat report came up with a very nice illustration also of the iceberg of this interaction. Now, I don't want to dwell on all of these things, but this iceberg gives you a very clear distinction of the different channels, the different tools, the different strings that you can connect with each other to either get a better amplification or to obscure your sources or to use it in a way, or to use these networks, you know, to achieve a specific aim. And they have attributed and very clear, well-labeled channels, state media, for example, where you know exactly, you know, who's behind and why. But then you have a staging, which is going to a very obscure kind of level of independent or so-called independent websites, sometimes individuals that are, and we could prove it in the last report, have a connection. And you need to show these connections. Otherwise, it's extremely difficult. Otherwise, you come back to this content versus behavior. So this idea that information manipulation, or that you tackle the issue of disinformation, of this activity, in particular if it comes from foreign actors. We can also discuss about domestic actors, but it's much more complicated, is something that needs to be clear in the approach. What exactly is the problem? What exactly do you want to address, and why do you want to address it? Otherwise, any response will be futile, you know, because otherwise you fall very quickly into this tricky area where you have good narratives and bad narratives, where you label specific opinions, maybe also as part of the disinformation. That is quite tricky. But to do this, you need a real toolbox. You need instruments. You need to have a policy behind, because this is not done just like this. And we have developed from the European Union side something that I show you now, which is very colorful, very complicated, and let me spend 2 minutes on what this is. This is the famous FIMI toolbox, and which says, okay, what can we do about it and how can we approach it? We don't need to go through all the elements, but I give you the gist of what this is and how we put this into practice. So I mentioned already with these different indicators, you need, number one, and that is the yellow part, you need to have a capacity as a state, but also as a society, to detect, to analyze, and to have a possibility to actually uncover what is behind. Otherwise, you're always guessing, you know, who's behind. You need to be able to attribute. You need to be able to have the technical means also to do this. Otherwise, you are very quickly lost in this is happening and this is a narrative out there and we don't like it. And this is not good policy. So you need a very clear operational capability in analytical terms. And that needs a structure, that needs a system, that needs a methodology. By the way, that's also where we built some of the FIMI methodology with this content and behavior. We call it the ABC model, actor, behavior, and content, you know, where we build this together in a quite technical term. So this is the yellow part. And there we have made a lot of progress, in particular in the European Union, in having a cooperation, not only at government level, but also between civil society organizations, researchers, hardcore analysts, a very, very important way, because if you do not know this part, then the rest will be difficult too. The red part is maybe the most important. That is, okay, if you have discovered all this, what can you do? The best and most important is to inoculate, to strengthen your own resilience. And resilience is one of these terms that are used all over the place at the moment. Everybody understands something different. And when I started the job working on this a couple of years ago, I was very often in discussions and people told me, we just need to do more media or digital media literacy. And the other ones who said, we need more strategic communications. And the others said, we need more capacity building. And the truth is, you need all of this. But you need to combine it. You need to bring it together. You need to foster it. It will not fall out of the sky. It will not just come because some NGO has a good idea. It needs some structuring. Otherwise, you lose this. In the very beginning of this debate on disinformation, the magical recipe to address it was very often fact-checking. You remember this, fact-checking organizations that came. Fact-checking is still very, very important, I find, because this is always kind of checking the content and always putting the finger on it. But fact-checking can be a very frustrating exercise, because fact-checking is done always after the narrative is out there, after it has happened. And it can become a very defensive way of doing. And the impact also is quite, let's say, limited sometimes. Still important, because you need the evidence. But fact-checking needs to be part of this resilience activity, but it also needs to have these educational elements that I talked about. It needs to have something also between different institutions, you know, to alert each other. And this is one of the elements that we built as European Union, is a rapid alert system. So a network of actually very hands-on structures in all EU member states that exchange information about what they see, how's this working, what structure have they discovered, is this something which is bigger, and quite important. And of course, the government not only government, but the communications, so also how you position yourself in the information environment is hugely important, but it's not the only element and needs to be seen together. The third element is something that is very specific, the blue part, to the European Union and very much discussed at the moment. Can you regulate? Can you have a state policy? Can you have laws in this area? And I want to say this comes back to this element of content versus behavior, where we see some countries around the world that have actually an anti-disinformation law. Anti-disinformation law prohibit certain parts to say, or individuals, media, etc., to actually voice their opinion. So very, very tricky. And from our perspective, speaking here for the European Union, nothing that we believe is neither appropriate nor actually feasible. We have taken a different approach. We actually thought, okay, we can regulate in this area, but we do not regulate on what is right and what is wrong, and what is good and what is bad, and what can be said and what cannot be said, but we go with the risk. We look at, is there an activity that actually represents a risk for our societies, for our structures, for a public discourse, you know, as much as you have, for example, terrorist content, you know, has a risk for the society or has a negative impact. If you take child pornography, you know, which is actually the content, which is illegal even, but the spreading of it is much more than a risk, it's actually a criminal offense. So you need to think sometimes a little bit out of the boxes. But this idea of looking at the risk of things, and there is a very simple equation behind. If we see, or if there was, let's put it like this, an external actor that can actually interfere in your public discourse and put it in a direction that either manipulate it or disturb it or denigrate it or whatever, it is a risk for a normal democratic society where every voice counts. Because manipulative, so FIMI activities are actually suppressing also voices because they take a lot of volume there. So our regulatory approach there is based on risk, is in a document that you might have heard about, the Digital Services Act, and that actually doesn't say you are allowed to say this or not, but it says the big platforms, so those areas where this amplification or this manipulation happens, they have an obligation to keep their house in order. And I really need to underline this. This is not about suppressing specific voices of specific opinions. It is more an obligation for the platforms, whether, let's say, users in their own networks are actually real users, or are they fake accounts? Are there fake networks? Are there fake structures? So this is kind of the regulatory part. And last but not least, you need, of course, also some other elements also for our international work. And there we have used soft tools like working with partners, international partners, in particular in the G7 context, or very sharp tools to use an instrument that we have also used, sanctions, for example, against those actors that are very clearly proven, you know, to be involved in those activities. So this very colorful, whatever you call it, sunflower or donut or whatever word you want to give it, is actually nothing else but a visual representation of what could be done, how you need to connect all these things. There are certainly others, but there are not many more things or many more kind of big clusters, you know, when you design a policy. And it's difficult because it goes also between different agencies, between different structures, between different groups, you know, if you want to build such a system. Now let me go a little bit more into some of the different latest developments and events, and I strongly recommend, if you have the time, to read these two documents. There are zillions of them, But just to illustrate a bit what I'm saying, the third report, you find them very easily if you Google them, of my former colleagues, gives you a very good overview of what the problem is, what the discussions are, some of the latest problems. And I very much also like this out of the zillions of different reports that have come out, but this one is very thoroughly researched on Russia in particular, on the use of the social design agency, how such a structure, which is clearly linked to the state structures, is being used for manipulative activities. So just to give you a bit of an idea how that works, and we called it transmission of a FIMI incident. And this is just to illustrate again what are we dealing with and how we need to approach it. It's actually a real case. So on March 31st of last year, of 24, there was a YouTube channel that was just created, you know, and it produced a video that claimed that President Zelensky of Ukraine bought a villa in the worth of 20 million pounds from King Charles III in the United Kingdom. This video was very quickly kind of taken up by a publication, The Crier, that was already identified beforehand, of picking exactly those different kind of, let's say, obscure videos that have been produced to amplify it. From there, the amplification went into the next level, into quite well-known and state-linked channels and different outlets like Newsfront, very interesting media, so-called media, you know, which is there basically to amplify. We know the owner structure, we know the purpose of it behind, and reached already quite a high level. Then it moves to state-controlled outlets. So if you look at Sputnik, for example, which has an official link even, and goes further into state official channels. And the whole thing then ends 5 days later by a more or less official kind of reference that a UK or British media report about this issue. You know? This is what we call information laundering. This is how it works, how you give just by passing it on to the next level again and amplifying and again to the next level, that you don't know anymore where the information came from originally, and because it made sometimes a full circle, you find all these data in the document that I referenced to you, but it just shows you what the problem is there. And again, it doesn't actually matter what was said. Of course, it's a falsely fabricated story, but actually it shows you how the ecosystem works behind. And that is very, very important to keep in mind. And I have to say, of course, Russia is not the only actor there. And I put here, it's a lot of text, it's just an illustration. You can certainly read it, and I make just a few comments about this. We see other state actors, structures, you know, using this type of activity with different tools, sometimes with slightly different intentions, but very deliberately linked to the state. And again, this is important for me, that there is this foreign actor. Russia, I think I said already quite a lot about it, how it works as a long-time actor, multitude of campaigns that have been exposed. I think there is absolutely no doubt about how that works, starting from the famous troll factories, you know, many, many years ago, to very, very sophisticated campaigns now. Again, the second report I really recommend to you. China is a bit a newer actor if we look at states, and certainly there are others as well, but China we characterize also in this report as an actor who actually uses different tools, different approaches, and can be summarized by three main activities. The first one is promoting its own messages, which is of course not illegitimate per se, but in a very aggressive and very technologically bound way. The second one is building a very, very clear presence and taking over media, sometimes with constructions, where you have exclusivity rights, so you can only use the content provided from a Chinese outlet, for example, as we have seen in Southeast Asia, for example. But these are not illegitimate activities per se, but you need to understand to see what is intended behind. The third element, and that is the more critical part, and also this is quite proven and well documented, is the suppression of voices also. So the built-in intimidation of journalists, of voices, of specific outlets, can come in very different forms and shapes, sometimes on a very personal level, sometimes by a multitude of comments, of trolls on the website or the platform where they have been. It can come also with different tools, as I said. But it's important to understand that this belongs together. This is really about reaching out in this information environment, having a very, very important footprint, and also using it to your own advantage. We also have here very clear campaigns that have been uncovered. Don't have the time to go into all of them, but where inauthentic structures, networks have been created, outlets that are either obfuscating their own linkages, for example, have been used just to amplify and to influence, and in the end also to manipulate have been used. It's a campaign called Paperwall, but again, something that I don't have the time to go into all details. I just want to show you that this is also an actor. And there are also other actors around, but these are the most active, visible, proven, and also well-documented cases. And if we move a little bit to the Indo-Pacific region, because this is what we wanted to focus on also, we see, first of all, our own basis for our work here is that in our own Indo-Pacific strategy and the way we're working with the partners here in the region, this is an issue that we look at. We want to strengthen the resilience. We want to strengthen the possibilities also to deal with this, either in sharpening kind of the resilience or in finding the right ways. This is just from our Indo-Pacific strategy, but it gives you a bit the background to all this. And we are seeing that this whole, let's say, not only geopolitical kind of setup is changing, but also in the FIMI world, we are seeing this. We see a very ad hoc, but nevertheless proven overlap sometimes of Russian and Chinese activities, where the same narratives are being used, where they're amplified. Sometimes quite absurd things, sometimes just the narratives, sometimes cross-references, but they are not, they are very intentional. They are not a coincidence behind. And that, of course, reflects certain political trends. That is for sure here. The second point is that with this approach, that this is not just about setting a narrative, but that this is about controlling the information environment at large. This poses, of course, a lot of problems. Is how do you deal with this? What, especially if you believe in the freedom of media and freedom of expression, and that news outlets can be created, and they should be created, but where do you draw the line exactly? A very, very complicated issue. And of course, a third issue, not only here in the Indo-Pacific, is the increased use of artificial intelligence in this field. It makes it faster, it makes it more complicated to detect, it makes it more professional in inverted commas, because when I started my previous job many years ago, it was still relatively easy to detect these networks because there was either poor language skills or mistakes or whatever. This is not really happening anymore because of automated systems that become more and more sophisticated. I come to the end and have a few thoughts about kind of next steps, challenges, and what we need to think about when we discuss these issues. The first one is institutional setup. Is it actually for, especially in a democratic society, do we need a body to deal with this? Do we need a coordination? Do we need a center for it? I let each and every one of you kind of give your own answer, but this is quite a discussion. There are some states in the world that have created their specific structures with very different tasks and approaches. In the European Union, for example, we have in Sweden an agency which is called the Psychological Defense Agency, which is really there to build resilience for the Swedish society against interference from outside, but also to prepare for it. In France, we have a structure which is called Viginum, which is really an analytical possibility, but well-structured, well-resourced, let's say with very clear democratic oversight as well, into the study, into the analysis of what is happening. So the real question is, where do you put this? Is this a defense issue? Is it a digital issue? Is it a democracy issue? Is it a domestic policy issue? It sounds a bit like a luxury problem, but in reality, this is a very, very important question. The next thing is, where do you bring this into the policy process? You know, is this now just about the general activity, or do you link it to very specific areas like critical infrastructure or other areas? Economic security, for example, is there a link between economic security and information manipulation? My answer would be yes. But how do you bring this knowledge and this capacity also into the process? Then the key issue that I spoke about, but I think we have found a good approach and we are rock solid on this, and I will defend this very, very clearly, kind of that we have found a good balance between addressing the issue, but also safeguarding our values in this one without compromising. Very, very important. The next one is this all of society approach. Is this now a government issue, or is it more for the civil society that needs to be dealt with, you know? My answer would be you need some form of cooperation, but in which context? Where do you place this exactly? Sorry, these are a lot of questions that are kind of, I don't have even the answers to them, but they are very important when we are continuing to design our own policy, when we work with our partners here in the region, but also beyond. These are all elements that we need to look at. Then the limits of the concept, I just said, if you look, of course, at the information environment only, if you really are focused very much on media and social media, do you capture everything? What about cyber activities that go deep into personal issues, for example, hacking of personal accounts, you know? The issue of closed communication groups. Is this a media issue, or is it more a cyber issue? So we don't have all the answers in this field, but that's why, as democracies, and this is very much the way we frame it, we need to have this continued, and that brings me to the next point, to this international cooperation in this field. Because we need to exchange our experiences. We need to see what works, what doesn't work, while keeping also our own specificities on each and every issue. I'm sure you have read about this issue very, very often from different perspectives, and you cannot compare kind of certain situations because domestic policy considerations, domestic structures, history, I don't know, whatever, you know, all plays in there. So there's no one size fits all, but seeing also that there is a threat is quite important. And last but not least, I leave this not as the most important point, but just as reflection. We have designed, or we're discussing in any case, international norms for the cyber security field. You know, what is allowed, what is not allowed. What is harmful should should not happen. So why don't we have international rules, you know, if we all agree that this shouldn't happen? But can we apply this idea also to the field of information manipulation? Is it something that we could use? Is it something, where would this sit? Would this be a UN norm? Would it be a general norm? How would you phrase this exactly? So you see, still a lot of different elements that need to be looked at. In closing, I just want to repeat this one point. This is not about who has the better narrative. The narrative is important, it's the tool, but it's what is behind. What is the intention? How is this played? Is this part of a broader toolbox? Is this part of different instruments that are being used of specific state actors? And sometimes you cannot even see the state actors because they are proxies actually being used. But it's about misleading, it's about manipulating, it's about impostures, it's about deceiving. So I think we have a pretty clear word for this. If this happened in a supermarket, it's called fraud. And fraud needs to be somehow addressed, you know, with tools. The tools that you have seen are the ones that we are developing. It's not easy. We go kind of step by step in this area. It's not perfect because there are always new situations, there are always new actors, there are always new political situations also that need to be involved in there. But we are quite clear that this is an issue to be addressed. And even if we still have some way to go, we believe this is a good basis for it. I hope you found this interesting. I gave you some of the sources. There are many, many more that I could refer to. I'm very happy to take also a few questions. I hope I can answer them, or I'm able to answer them. But if you have if you look also for specific additional materials, kind of if you start with this, it gives you a very, very good insight. So thank you very, very much.